Well, those are the chimes, and here we go. So I see familiar faces. Those of you who were here yesterday, thank you so much for coming and spending another morning with me. It's very gracious of you. And for those of you who might be here for the first time, is anybody here who wasn't here yesterday? Oh, wonderful, wonderful, welcome. And so this is part of our Lenten mission, trying to become men and women fully alive, the glory of God, by Easter. And the way that we're trying to do that is by cutting attachments that hold us down and keep us from flying free. So yesterday, what I did was talk about how we can consider what our most strongest attachments are and how we can make them a kind of queen's gift to God this Lenten season. Now today, what I'm going to talk about is the idea of prayer, and prayer as a way of healing a strong attachment, which is often our sense of brokenness and woundedness. So even though the idea of something broken doesn't feel very strong, it actually is extremely strong. And so what I'd like to talk about is using prayer, another one of our Lenten practices, as a way of healing the brokenness so we can let those wounds go. Okay, so Jesus loved metaphors. He used them all the time. Sheep, fish, bread, grapes, yeast, salt, on and on and on. Metaphor is a way of speaking powerfully about a complex idea when ordinary language is just simply inadequate. So Christ explained the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in the field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it's larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make their nests in its branches. Lovely. Now, I love metaphors too. I am unqualified to speak about the kingdom of heaven, but I am very qualified to speak about the kingdom I live in, the kingdom of man. So here goes. The kingdom of man is like a bumper car ride at an amusement park. Drivers hitting and being hit, trying to avoid impact, but never succeeding. The kingdom of man is like the woman who cries because her favorite teacup is broken and she can't make it whole again. The kingdom of heaven is a place of harmony, peace, rest, and eternal joy. The kingdom of man, on the other hand, is a valley of tears. We poor, benighted people driving around in our battered, banged-up cars or shattered like teacups. And why is that? Well, because crazy drivers, people who are just butterfingers with the teacups, all of those people making a mess of our lives. When the contemplative Trappist monk Thomas Merton was asked to name the hardest thing about living in a monastery, he said, other monks. So we know what he meant. How many of our days go by without someone frustrating us, disappointing us, annoying us, or making us totally livid? And what do we do in response? Ignore it? Or lash out, sulk, retaliate, or grow a nice, comfy grudge? We've all nursed a grudge against someone, at least I certainly have, and it's amazing how easily I can get rather fond of it. A grudge is comforting in a perverse way because it gives me an excuse to stay permanently resentful of someone and never have to move forward. Now, I know it's bad and we're supposed to forgive 70 times 7, but it's so much easier to settle down inside of a nice, deep, warm grudge. Now, my old teacher and friend, Father Joe, whose family is Boston Irish, used to talk about the power of a grudge to corrupt us. He gave me a scolding once when I asked him if there was such a thing as righteous anger. I was so mad at someone for what he'd done to me, and I was angry. Father, is there righteous anger? And he said, yes, my dear, but ask yourself, are you letting your heart get hard? Don't do that. Otherwise, you're going to grow old with a bad case of Irish Alzheimer's. That's where you forget everything but the grudges. So I know he's right. I'm a Christian woman. I know we're supposed to get along, but anger is a powerfully destructive force. That's why Jesus said, you've heard it said, you shall not murder. But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raca, will be answerable to the Sanhedrin. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the fiery Gehenna. So what is Jesus saying? That we should never get mad at anyone? That we should avoid other people so that they don't ever hurt us? That we should just take everything people dish out? Not at all. He goes on to say, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, first go and be reconciled, then come and give your gift. What Jesus really wants is for us to learn the art of repair, the skill to mend broken relationships and so make the body of Christ whole again, over and over and over again. But first, we have to want to. A lame man lays on his mat at the pool of Bethsaida. He's been there every day, day after day after day for 38 years. Jesus approaches him and asks him a question he asked no other suffering man in all of the Gospels. Do you want to be healed? Now, what a strange question. Who wouldn't want to be healed? So what did the lame man answer? Yes, Lord, heal me. No, he did not. Instead, he complained and blamed. Sir, I have no man to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, another one steps down ahead of me. In other words, I guess I'm going to be lame forever because no one will help me. It's their fault. He likes his pain and his grudge. Christ, in his mercy, healed him anyway. Now, contrast this with the woman who had been hemorrhaging every day for 12 long years. She too had made every effort to get better, seen every doctor, spent all her money. No one could help her. But hearing Jesus, she was positively convinced that he could heal her. She didn't wait to be asked if she wanted to be healed. No, she shoved her way through the crowd and grabbed at him. If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. The second she did, her bleeding stopped. Jesus turned and looked at her and said, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Freed from our suffering. I mean, wouldn't it be nice? Now, I know somebody who's free like that. So Betty just celebrated her 96th birthday and on Ash Wednesday. And her ailments, I tell you, could fill a medical textbook. She's confined to a wheelchair, has macular degeneration, serious diabetes, partial paralysis of her face and spine, and chronic pain in every single joint. She's been a widow for decades, and now 2 of her 6 children have predeceased her, including one of them, a 70-year-old daughter, just a few weeks ago, of bone cancer. I went to visit her on Monday this week, and I was more than a little worried about her because another one of her daughters had texted me to say that Betty's been just diagnosed with stage 4 kidney disease. So after I kissed her, I said to her, Betty, how's your health? She laughed. My health? My health is fine. It's just my body falling apart. But the Lord isn't done with me yet. He got me this far. He's going to get me home. In the meantime, there's lots of work to do around this nursing home and fun to have. So you want some leftover birthday cake? Now, she's an amazing, amazing woman. And it's astonished me that not only isn't she feeling sorry for herself, but even more that she isn't angry at God for the extraordinary amount of pain, grief, and illness she's enduring in her 96th year. I know lots of people who get mighty angry with God for the things that go wrong in their lives. In fact, I'm the caretaker of a beautiful little gold cross with a diamond center that my friend Sharon gave me 15 years ago when I was confirmed. She said it belonged to my sister, who converted to Catholicism when she got married. And then she got breast cancer and decided she didn't want anything to do anymore with a God who would let her get sick. So she took the cross and she said to Sharon, give it to Lisa, and maybe God will be better to her. So I took it with so much pity for Sharon's sister, and I said, I'll take care of it until she wants it back. Anger ruptures relationships absolutely everywhere, with each other and with God, but not Betty. She's got a firm grip on the hem of Christ's tunic, and she is not letting go. She's good with him. She's good with everything else. He's freed her from her suffering, even if she's in a lot of pain. So how did she get there? Now, when I trained as a minister of care in hospice, the sister who taught us told us that when we meet a new patient, we should be prepared to hear the anguished voices cry out, "Why me, God? Why are you doing this to me? No good God would ever let something like this happen to me." It's understandable, after all. It's the echoes of Jesus' own words on the cross. My God, why have you abandoned me? But it was our job as ministers, she said, to go ever so gently to our patients and their families to help them not get stuck in the suffering, but to ask a different question. What would you have me learn here, Lord, from this suffering? Because there's always something to learn, always. So let's see what we can learn by starting with some garden variety everyday suffering. My husband gets up on the wrong side of the bed, and so my day gets off to a lousy start, having to look at his grumpy face across the breakfast table. So I speak a little too sharply to someone at work and watch his face crumple in response. With the shoe on the other foot, my feelings are hurt when a customer yells at me. I could go on and on. I'm annoyed when my niece doesn't acknowledge my graduation gift. I pout when my mother forgets my birthday. I boil over with anger when I find that one of my colleagues has lied to me about how he spent our company's money. But I don't just get mad. I decide to get even. So, remembering his grumpy morning face, I don't greet my husband when he comes home from work, and when he asks what's wrong, I say, nothing. I blame my unhappy customer for causing the problem he's having. I decide that without a thank you, my niece is now not going to get a Christmas gift, and I get even with my mom for forgetting my birthday, for forgetting hers. I wrap myself in resentment and give as good as I get. Now, Gandhi knew where this would all end up. An eye for an eye, and soon the whole world will be blind. So we know we can't go there. Instead, we have to rush headlong into the wounded breach and do what Jesus would have us do: practice the art of repair. Now, I learned how to do this from a master repairman at a Yom Kippur service 15 years ago. I went to the service because my friend Marilee invited me to go. I'd never been to a Jewish service before, and I wanted to see what it was like. But even more than that, I wanted to honor her the same way she'd honored me by coming to Mass so many times with me. The service was held in the Mormon Church on Lake Avenue in Wilmette, which generously offers its big building to its Jewish neighbors for the high holidays because their own small synagogue can't accommodate everyone. That night, the building was packed. Sitting among all of those strangers, I felt out of place at first, but as soon as things got going, I was right at home. All of the prayers, the readings, the psalms were completely familiar to me, and I was happy to be among all those men and women that I now think of as my older brothers and sisters in faith. When it was time for the sermon, the rabbi walked to the pulpit. He was a man in his 40s with a round body and a brown beard, twinkling eyes. And he told us he wanted to talk about prayer and the way it lets us rush into any breach with God and heal it. And even more, how it cements us to Him so that our relationship becomes so strong, nothing can break it. Not even breast cancer. The prayers that heal and bind are simple to remember. He said they're called please, wow, thanks, and oops, sorry. I was already familiar with the 4 prayers by their more formal names: petition, adoration, thanksgiving, reparation. But I have to say, the informal way that the rabbi named them was just delightful. So while I listened to him teach about how often we beg God for things, but how seldom we remember to thank Him, how reluctant we are to admit our mistakes and ask for forgiveness, how rarely we simply stop and look around and say, "How great Thou art." It was the words, please, wow, oops, thanks a lot, that kept dancing around in my head. And I thought, if those prayers heal our relationship with God and bind us ever tighter to Him, maybe those same words, if we pour them like balm into our wounded human relationships, might just heal them too. The way Japanese use gold to mend a precious broken teacup. Have you ever seen one of those? Broken veins of gold, making the teacup whole again. Thank you. You're great. Please help me. I'm sorry. We say that to God. Why not to each other? So let me start with the words that are sometimes the hardest to say. I'm sorry. Now, my friend Megan, who's an adult convert like me, told me that for most of her life, she rarely apologized to anyone for anything. She thought that admitting a mistake or acknowledging responsibility for a failure or for hurting someone made her look weak and gave other people power over her. So if she bumped into someone in the grocery store with her cart, she responded to the person's surprised face with, "You were in my way." She would blame a poor performance at work on failure of her teammates. And if she happened to offend someone with a careless remark and they said so, she would just say, "You're too sensitive, toughen up." And worst of all, in hindsight, she now realizes that her marriage failed, in large part because she refused ever to say she was sorry. We all know people like Megan. We've all done things like Megan. But at her first sacrament of reconciliation, the hardest thing she had ever done, it changed all of that. Weeks ahead of time, she practiced saying, "I'm sorry" to God over and over for the things she wanted to confess. And in so doing, she realized just how miserable she'd been making herself and other people by being so unwilling to apologize to them. But now, as a blossoming Catholic, she pours those golden words of an eager apology into any breach between herself and someone else. So if she bumps into someone's cart in the grocery store accidentally, she says, "I'm sorry." And more often than not, here's the person reply, "Don't worry, let me get the cart out of the way." Or at work, if she admits the mistake was my fault, and she'll hear her colleagues say, "It's okay, now just let's fix it." Or when someone takes an offense at her careless remark, she'll say, "I'm so sorry. I offended you. I didn't mean it. Please forgive me." And in response, she hears, "Apology accepted. Forget about it." I say things sometimes I wish I hadn't said too. And at last, married once again, she's committed herself to be the first one to say, "I'm sorry." A scratch that could have festered into a gash heals right up. Truth be told, sometimes the other person is at fault. But Megan doesn't care. She realizes that saying "I'm sorry" a little more generously than true justice would require doesn't make her weak or a doormat, but more Christ-like. St. Peter said, "By his wounds ours are healed." So Megan is willing to be a little wounded too, now and again, in the name of healing. She said, "My Catholic faith has taught me that the three most important words in the English language are, 'Please forgive me.'" 3 little words. We all know the power of another 3 little words, "I love you." That brings me to the rabbi's next prayer. Wow, the prayer of adoration. "You amaze me, you delight me, I adore you." Bishop Sheen once said that the rosary is nothing but one long prayer of adoration, and Mary never gets tired of being told how much we adore her. None of the rest of us gets sick of praise either. But how often do we think positive and loving thoughts about someone and things that would make a good relationship stronger, but we never say a word? So when was the last time you stopped to tell the cantor in church who's singing you that you've admired for years just how beautiful it is and how much it touches your heart? Or told the lector that how clearly you could hear the voice of the Holy Spirit in his? Or written a note to the pastor to tell him how much his sermon meant to you, even if you did shake his hand and say, "Nice sermon," on the way out? When we pour a golden wow into a relationship, it strengthens it the way calcium strengthens our bones so that they don't break so easily, even if they get a little banged up now and again. Now, I know there are a lot of reasons not to say wow, just like there are reasons not to say "I'm sorry." Sometimes it's not wanting to inflame someone's pride. Sometimes we want to hold back our praise so as not to cheapen it. Sometimes it's one of our own wounds that we never got enough praise ourselves. But praising someone sincerely and honestly when he has truly delighted us is something I can't imagine we could ever overdo. If God never tires of our awe at his sunsets, and Mary is always happy to hear one more "Blessed art thou," then there's no reason to think we're overdoing it when we express joy and delight in each other. Hebrews 3:13 says, "Encourage each other daily while it is still today." Why not? And so perhaps it's also worthwhile to think about praising people we don't like, too, because surely there must be something praiseworthy about them. Praise freely given and received might just be reciprocated, and then who knows? Not the beginning of a broken relationship, but the beginning of a beautiful one. Please, prayers, humbly asked, make people better friends too. Think for a moment about a time when you've been terribly sick, miserable, lying in bed. You ask the person caring for you for a drink of water. Your throat is so dry. Please, your eyes cry out. And so he or she brings you water and you drink. Are you not more strongly knitted together? Doesn't he love you more because you needed him? Don't you love him more because he helped you? Giving and receiving has this way of doing that, binding us together. Now, we ask each other for things scores of times every day. Help finding the car keys, a ride to the train, help opening a jar of peaches, for a little more ice cream after dinner. We ask when we're sick, when we're in trouble, and when we're overwhelmed. But when we're in the middle of an argument, or when a relationship is falling apart, we don't usually ask for help. We just put up our dukes and get ready for a brawl. Now, when I think about the wounds that are opening up all over my life over politics these days, I hardly know what to do. If I happen to say something to my oldest friend that she disagrees with, she just gets mad at me. And it's hard not to get mad back at her. And so, fearing irreparable damage to our decades-long relationship, we just don't talk much anymore. Maybe something similar has happened to you. There are scores of articles about how you handle these things around the holiday dinner tables, but none of the advice is very satisfying to me. So perhaps, in light of my theme today, we might consider pouring a golden please into these wounds before they're beyond repair. Please help me understand, please. Now, I need to follow my own advice, of course, because sometimes I consider my friend's political opinions so completely irrational that I don't stop to consider that while she makes no sense to me, she makes total sense to herself. And so I ought to ask her why she thinks what she does, instead of trying to convince her how wrong she is. I could say, please help me understand why you think that, in the right tone of voice, of course. And when I ask, I have to trust that she isn't going to repay my plea with a verbal slap in the face. It's not hard, really, to make that leap of trust. The people with whom we have some relationship, our families, our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors, they love us, even if just a little. Attach a please to that love, and maybe, just maybe, a good conversation will happen. And after that, better understanding. And after that, a bound-up wound, even if there is no agreement. And last, our request, having been kindly answered, deserves the response we were all taught as children. Now what do you say? Yet thank you comes so slowly and reluctantly sometimes. Jesus was disappointed too in the 9 lepers that didn't stop to thank him. Thank you is the most golden adhesive of all. With a thank you, we recognize someone has given us something of themselves, and we're better off because of it. I think sometimes it's not just thoughtlessness or a sense of entitlement that makes us fail to say thank you, but the inability to recognize just how dependent we are on each other and how much we owe one another for all the good in our lives. St. Paul said, the eye can't say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can't say to the feet, well, I don't need you. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part participates in its joy. You are the body of Christ. Each one of you is part of it. So once we realize that, really realize that, we have to wonder why we ever let these wounds open up in the first place. We are truly one body, and the damage we do to others and the damage they do to us is all a kind of self-harm. A simple thank you heals up a lot of those wounds. So my relationship with my dad was always very strained. I can truthfully say I was a dutiful daughter, but I have to admit being a hard-hearted one. Now, before Dad died, his last words to me, to my sisters, to his wife, to his nurses, his caregivers, and the other residents at the nursing home were, thank you. Thank you for everything. It was the first time he had ever said those words to me in the 61 years I knew him. And I couldn't help but think how different his life would have been and our relationship would have been if he'd been able to say it sooner. But in the end, he said them. And now I'm not mad at him anymore. That old wound healed right up, although there's still a scar. So there we have it. My meditation on kintsugi, the Japanese art of repair with gold, inspired by a rabbi on Yom Kippur. Wow, please, thanks so much, I'm sorry. A repair kit right at the tip of our tongues. So as the congregation exited the worship space, people were shaking the rabbi's hand as they left. My friend Marilee took me up to meet him. She said, "Rabbi, I'd like you to meet my friend Lisa. She's a brand new Catholic." I extended my hand to shake his, my little crucifix around my neck, but he didn't take it. Instead, he opened up his arms and threw them around me. "Thanks be to God," he said. Still makes me cry. And there we were, one Jew and one Christian, no division, no disorder, just two people who both love God, wrapped in a bear hug of praise and thanksgiving. So when, on Good Friday, Christ will pour his precious blood into all of humanity's wounds, and in sealing them up, he will make us not just whole again, but like those Japanese teacups, even more beautiful than we were before. So this Lent, in imitation of Christ himself, even though it might cost us a little bit of time and a smidgen of pride, can we pour the molten gold of our praise, our pleadings, our remorse, and our thanks into the wounds that are between us? So with whom do you need to start? Repairer of the breach, they shall call you. So let me finish with a little quote from Isaiah here. "If you remove the yoke from among you, the accusing finger, the malicious speech, then light shall rise for you in the darkness, and the gloom shall become for you like midday. Then the Lord will guide you and give you plenty, even on a parched land. He will renew your strength, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring that never fails. The ancient ruins will be rebuilt for you. Repairer of the breach, they shall call you. Restorer of ruined homes. Repairer of the breach. Wouldn't that be a nice title? No longer broken, no longer hanging on to pain, whole, men and women fully alive, the glory of God." So God bless you all once again. Thank you so much for listening. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So once again, there will be adoration shortly. There will be a little coffee and tea out in the vestibule there. I would just like to let you know that there will be an interesting Stations of the Cross we're going to try at 12:15 today. Instead of, in line with our theme today, instead of the 14 stations being the classic ones, each station will be one of the healings of Christ in the Bible. And there's way more than 14, so I had my pick. So if you can do that, I hope to see you there. And I don't know if any of you, I'll see tomorrow all afternoon if you're up for 3 more talks. But if not, I wish you a very blessed Lent, and thank you for coming.